Hello. I guess the mic is on. I didn't do a mic check before, but if we could take our seats, we'd like to get started and respect everyone's time. My name is Jamie Johnson. I want to welcome you to the Hudson High School. Thank you for coming to this community informational forum. I'm going to be introducing the speakers to set, or actually the moderator, and he'll be introducing the speakers. So tonight we have two presentations. One is from Dr. Tom Gillespie, who's going to be talking about student enrollment and population projections. And he's going to have a presentation that lasts around 20 minutes. We'll take about 20 minutes of questions and answers, and then approximately at 7:15, we'll start with a presentation from the architects at Bray and Associates. And then their presentation will be roughly 20 minutes, and then questions and answers pertaining to their report. And then at the end, we'll have questions that could go to either. And we'll stay here till about 8:30. That's when we told folks we'll be wrapping up. For those of you who may not know, tonight's meeting is being videotaped, and so that those that could not make it here because of other engagements will be able to view this on the school website. If that website is foreign to you, it's hudson.k12.wi.us. And you'll hear it a lot because this whole community engagement process, we have an acronym for everything, of course, and that acronym is CEP, Community Engagement Process. This process started back in January when the school board authorized the formation of a process steward team. And that acronym, of course, PST. And it just means that this whole process of community engagement is being stewarded by a group intending to, the three primary goals are that we develop a community engagement process that attempts to build consensus, that attempts to engage as many stakeholders as possible, and that we encourage a process that is trustworthy and transparent. And we are now entering stage 3 of our community engagement process. Stage 1 was started again around February and into March. We left on the website, there was a several-page questionnaire survey about the community's expectations for education in Hudson, programming, and so forth. And then following stage 1, we went into stage 2, which was to identify the gaps. So we started with the educational needs and the programming of what the community thought was important, and then we get into an assessment of our facilities and the adequacy of those in various areas, and that will be described in more detail by Matt from Bray and Associates. The entire comments from the community, both stage 1 and stage 2, can be found on that website, hudson.k12.wi.us. We do have a executive summary of stage 2. I hope that some of you were able to get that. We had reports of tonight's presenters, but we ran out of hard copies. Their reports, likewise, are on the website that I mentioned. At this time, I would like to introduce our process steward team and take another opportunity to thank them for their time commitment. The process steward team is comprised of 8 people. We have 4 community members, and they are in no particular order. Tom Van Pelt. Tom, you're here. If you please stand and stay standing. Tom Van Pelt from Village of North Hudson. We have Paul Bourget from the town of Hudson, and Jill Burchell from the city of Hudson, and Joel Skinner from the town of St. Joseph. And I want to give these folks a particular round of applause for volunteering for this. And then, in addition to the 4 community members, we have Dave Grambo and Tracy Habishaline from the administration, and Bruce Hanson and myself from the school board. So, this group has been meeting since January, designing this process. We've worked with a consultant at the beginning, Ann Carroll, and we've now, evolved this process as we go. Trying to get, again, that trust and transparency as well as inclusiveness. And it's I don't know, 18-plus meetings going on probably 30 to 40 hours. Our average meetings are 90 minutes to 2 hours long, just trying to work out these details for programs such as tonight. So that's what we've done up to this point, and those are the people on the Process Steward team. And I mentioned that we have a video, and I should also mention Stage 3, which is what we're kicking off tonight, and that is getting the community's ideas for how do we address our secondary space issues that we have here in the Hudson School District. There's actually paper back there that had the question that we have. It's on the website, so you can go online. Your comments can be as brief as you want, could take you 3 minutes. We've reduced the number of pages on our questions. Stage 1 had 12 pages, Stage 2 had about 7, and now we're down to 2. So we do like to get a little information about your background and age groups, because again, we're trying to reach all stakeholders and all groups of people in the community. And then the Stage 3 is going to be open until July 24th. So, but tonight's purpose is to provide information for those of you that have read the reports either online or from the hard copies that were provided here. You're welcome to ask questions. Those questions can be done at the open mic, or we had 3x5 postcards or that you could fill out a question, index cards, I guess, and hand those to our moderator, who I'm about to introduce. Some of you probably already know Howard Cameron is a recently retired judge from St. Croix County. I've known Howard personally for, I think it's 28 years. Actually, 31, you're right. We started law school together back in 1984. So I've known him a long time. He hails from northern Wisconsin, the Spooner and Rice Lake area, but he's been in this community a long time. He's been a St. Pat's volunteer. He's actually a former teacher himself. He taught for 6 years, and his wife is a recently retired 36-year employee of the school district. So we appreciate her service and appreciate Judge Cameron donating his time tonight and helping us moderate this. At this time, I'll turn it over to Judge Cameron. Thank you, Judge.
Good evening, and thanks for being here. Before I introduce our first presenter, Dr. Gillespie, just a few reminders. Don't be afraid to get up when someone's talking and get a card if you want to remember what your question is, okay? I'll read the questions if you don't want to go to the microphone. And the questions, just a reminder, related to the presentation, what they're going to talk about, these two gentlemen. Additionally, if you have a cell phone, my cell phone's there. Just turn off your ringer, okay, so it doesn't ring. I know one time a judge told someone, not in this county, he said, you ever take your phones off, turn them off, and whose phone went off a minute later? His phone. So just a reminder on that, like Jamie mentioned, these handouts are all online. I looked at them yesterday at these handouts. They're there. I saw the survey online. I did not fill that out yet, though. All right, our first speaker is going to be Dr. Gillespie. He's a demographics presentation, and he'll give you a short background on his experience, but I do know he spent 35 years in the state of Minnesota as a demographer, working for them, done some school work, but he'll give you his background and give his presentation then.
Thank you, Judge. For the sake of time, and since you already have the information I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to go fairly quickly. I'll skip over some things, but some things I want to spend a little bit of time talking about because I think they're important. Here we go. I was asked to do an analysis of recent trends for the district and for enrollment trends. Look at a near-term future projection of enrollments by grade. This is based upon current enrollment trends and the relationships from one grade to the next. then do a longer run view that is based upon a population projection. And here this also springs from some of the work that I did with the county on the bridge impact study. Just a little bit on background. As it turns out, the last 7 years have been a pretty dramatic time, and we have seen some trends that were in existence for a very long time. Basically, trends that had continued ever since World War II suddenly turned on their heads within a year. And it doesn't get much more dramatic than that. One of the things that we saw a huge impact in, and this directly affects enrollments over time, is that there was an enormous change in the birth rates in the county, in the school district, in the state, in the upper Midwest, and in the nation. And what happened with the recession was that the number of babies born declined by about 15% in 2008. The normal course over a recession is that births will decline, people will put off having babies for a year or two, but then they will try to catch back up to where they wanted to be, and then we will see an increase back to the trend line that we had anticipated. This rebound has not occurred. It has not occurred in Wisconsin. It has not occurred in St. Croix County. It has not occurred in the upper Midwest. It has not occurred in the nation. And the Census Bureau now believes that this is a new, long-run, lower fertility trend. Well, you say, well, what does that have to do with schools? Well, after about 5 years, children tend to show up at the school, which illustrates a theory that we have in demography. It's a theory, mind you, but it's a theory that's pretty central to a lot of things, is that most of us age somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 year every 12 months. So if we can keep that in mind, that the child that is born this year will be in the enrollment figures within 5 years. Now, if you look at the current enrollment configuration, you can see that really reflected in past births, that the current high school population was born between 1997 and 2001. That was a relatively low period of births, and then we had an increase in the number of babies born. This is a consistent pattern nationally. We had an increase in the number of babies born, so that the current middle school students reflect that higher number. And then we sort of peaked out in 2008 or 2007, and we began that downward slide, and that those children are now beginning to show up in primary school. So big changes in the number of babies born with direct impact on enrollment in the near-term future. The second big change that we saw, and again, this was a national change, but it certainly affected the county, was that after experiencing decades of extremely rapid growth, similar to the kind of growth that we saw in other similar kind of counties around the nation, new development moving outward, metropolitan areas expanding outward. The Twin City metropolitan area was certainly characteristic of this, consistent with the national trend. And that trend had continued for a very long period of time, even despite some policy attempts around the nation to slow that outward growth. It made no difference. People continued to move outward, because when we ask people, well, where would you really most like to live? The answer over 4 straight generations was always the same. I want to live further out, more elbow room. I want a more rural kind of environment, but I still want to be within easy striking distance of a major metropolitan area for jobs and shopping and entertainment. Oh, wow. It doesn't get much better for St. Croix County, does it? It's a great location. And then in the middle of the decade, starting at really about 2006, we began to see the breakdown begin to happen, but it really was reinforced in the recession. We saw the rapidly growing counties suddenly experience big dips in the rates of growth. That was also true in the southwest part of the United States. It was true in the southeast part of the United States. It was true all over the nation. Metropolitan areas began to see their most rapidly growing counties slow down in their growth, and the central counties, the central core of the cities, began to see even more growth than they had in the past. And so Minneapolis and St. Paul right now are growing. The inner ring suburbs are growing, and they are growing as rapidly as St. Croix County and the other most rapidly growing counties in the area. The question is that every developer asks me on a consistent basis, is this going to continue forever? What happens when the millennials grow up and decide they don't want to live in the central city and decide that they want to live in St. Croix County? Well, right now, there's no indication that that's happening, nor when they are surveyed that there's even an interest in potentially doing that. So we seemed, again, to have moved into a very different kind of world. These are enormous, dramatic changes that were, to the large extent, unanticipated. And I'm going to skip over a couple things, but feel free to ask about those. Grade progression ratios are the relationship between this year's enrollment in a grade and against last year's enrollment in a prior grade. So, for example, 6th grade enrollment this year compared to 5th grade enrollment last year. It can be above 1 or below 1. Usually they tend to be around 1, so that the same number of kids go from 5th grade to 6th grade. But if it's greater than 1, that means that some children have moved in to the district. And the history of Hudson School District is that there was a strong and enduring net inflow of students that has been on a downward track, particularly since the recession, and we are now in a situation where there's essentially nearly a net zero effect of migration of new students into the district. That doesn't mean that will necessarily last forever, but right now it seems to be an enduring characteristic where migration has slowed down. So if we look at a shorter run view, and this is based on those grade progression ratios by individual grade and trending those ratios over time, looking out to the next 5 years. So this is a shorter run analysis that is useful for staffing, planning, budgeting, and the such. That it appears from this that the lower grades, particularly grades 5 through K through 5, will see a decline in enrollment. That's the top line there. The lower line is the middle school enrollment, which looks like at this time it appears that will increase slightly between now and 2018, and then take a little bit of a dip at the end of the decade. The high school enrollment, grades 9 through 12, will see a bit of an increase, a modest increase between now and the end of the decade. The longer run model takes a very different kind of approach, and this is really a projection of population as opposed to enrollment. And I know that's sort of hard to make sure that we keep that in our mind, but this is a look specifically at the change in population over the next 25, 30 years, well beyond anything that could be done by that grade progression ratio method. This method attempts to predict or forecast the number of babies born in each year, the number of people who die by age and gender, and also the migration by age and gender into or out of the study area. The projections that we've done here are consistent with projections done for the bridge impact study, but specifically for the populations of the school district. Looked at different models, and to some extent, these are lining up perfectly with the bridge impact study. Model 1 is a model that assumes that there would be a very slow start of migration, that the bridge would have very little impact through the remainder of this decade, but then the impact would build and there would be a sustained in-migration thereafter. The second model, Model 2, assumes that there is a steady migration into a modest migration into the area. Model 3, which incidentally aligns with the official state Wisconsin state projections for the county, Model 3 assumes that there is rapid growth resulting from strong in-migration per year that moderates over time after 2025. For the district, for the county, these models look like this. The top is Model 3, but also includes the state projection. And you can see there's really little difference between Model 1 and Model 2, except in the shorter run, you have to get to a much more granular level to find what the differences are. Focusing this approach onto Hudson School District, we can look at a projection out to 2040 of population by age group. Now again, that doesn't exactly line up with school year and school age, but we're attempting to do some work along those lines right now. The 19-year-old age population, many 19-year-olds in Hudson School District, when they graduate from high school, leave the area and go to college, and it's nearly half. So that's the 19-year-old is not a huge population, but we would need to account for that. Basically, overall for the school district, the models are anticipating a bit of a rise in enrollment over the next 5 years. Model 3 would give us a fairly steady enrollment, total enrollment K through 12 to 2025, followed by a bit of a downward slope for over a decade. Model 2 would tend to show a modest decline in enrollments after 2020. If we look at age groups 5 to 9, which is elementary school age, that is a downward track, and that reflects that lower birth rate model. Could that turn around? Yes, it could. But right now, it's increasingly looking like this is a longer run national trend. Middle school, approximately middle school age population, age 10 to 14, a bit of an increase through the remainder of this decade, followed by a bit of a downward dip after that. Reflecting again that the children that were born in the last 7 years are growing up, and that is a relatively modest number of children, smaller than their prior cohorts. The age 15 to 19, approximately the high school age population, shows an increase between now and the end of the decade, a further increase to 2025, followed by a decade of a modest decline, followed by a stabilization in population in that age group. And let me stop there and, Judge, see if there are any questions.
Give a short, brief resume real quick.
Oh, my resume.
I would just like to give a little bit of a
Oh.
background, okay?
Okay, approximately 35 years as the Minnesota State Demographer. I have worked with many school districts in the past in my official capacity. I'm still working with school districts and also with a private school, actually that is partially one of your competitors, Hill Murray School in North St. Paul. And I live in Stillwater, and so I'm like a neighbor. And I did work also on the bridge impact study, and only do consulting work that's fun, and this is fun. So, thank you.
Does anybody have any cards they want to bring up? Anybody want to use the microphone? You want to think about it for a minute.
Nobody wants to scream at me.
We don't know. Why don't you just think about it just for a minute, okay? Just digest some of the information you saw today. And like I mentioned, all these are online. I looked at them yesterday myself. So if you didn't he didn't show all of them, I know, but you can go back, you can look at all of them that he has there. Why don't you come up, you got to use the microphone, though, because everybody has to hear you. That's part of the rule. Only reason that, because I'm hearing impaired, and when I worked at a person who did it real time, and it drives me crazy, and I can't hear people, especially my wife.
Sorry, I'm a data geek, but one of the questions I have is how often do you do studies like this if we had another recession, or clearly there will be other impacts that would change the way the study works? And then the follow-up is, how does this compare to capacity? I don't know if you're going to talk about that or not.
Okay. A couple things. Making forecast is always a humbling experience. I'm always right, but most people aren't. Have had a reasonably good level of success, but the period from around the recession and a couple of years after were extremely difficult for most people doing forecasting. The former Minnesota State economist and I had been talking about 2008 as a squirrely year since about 1990. We knew something was going to happen. We just didn't know what. We did not anticipate the level of change that we've seen. It has been really enormous. And I think that we will not fully understand the impact of this for at least a couple more decades. This has been a time of enormous social change. Why did we believe that 2008 would be a squirrely year? Well, that was the year that the high school class would reach a peak across the nation, and see a modest decline, as we've seen in Hudson, reaching a low point of about now and then increasing. And coupled with that, the first wave of the baby boom generation turned age 62 and became eligible for Social Security old age pension. And we have seen an enormous increase in the number of retired people that continues to this day at record levels, and just enormous social change in our society. Against that backdrop, as I said, forecasting is always a humbling experience. It's something that we should check regularly. My advice to the Bridge Impact Study folks was, when asked, well, which one of these 3 possibilities do you think is going to happen? I said, you're going to know pretty quickly. Wait till the bridge is finished, and then check it a couple years after that. And if you're not seeing a big response, then maybe it's Model 2. If you're seeing a really large response, then maybe it's Model 3. So what I've tried to do is bracket the reality. In longer run forecast, I do not think it's advisable to look at point forecast, because almost certainly they are going to be off. So what we're trying to do here is to give the district and give you folks a sense of what the potential range, what the most likely range is. The shorter run projections are normally much easier because they're based upon actual grade progression, and those tend to be very stable, except in this period they were not. And so I'm assuming that they're going to be stable in the near-term future, but, big changes can happen, and if something happens in the world that totally disrupts everything else that you're doing, you can pretty well figure it's going to have an impact on the school districts as well. So you might want to think about redoing it at that time. The previous forecasts that were done at a very unfortunate time. I didn't do those. I don't want to talk about the methodologies or anything, but from what I've seen, it looked all very reasonable. It's very professionally done. It was at a very unfortunate time when there were enormous changes occurring, and many people around the country got caught in an unexpected situation.
Any other questions from anybody? Any cards? All right, that's it for you, Dr. Gillespie. Thank you very much. And next speaker, do you need to get your material up online then, Matt? He makes it look so simple getting that up. Well, the next speaker is Matt Wolford. Matt is with Bray & Associates. They're located in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, I think the headquarters are, and also in Milwaukee. He'll give a background, a little bit of his company, and his background, or the people he worked with to do this. A little bit of resume, if you would, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Judge. Again, my name is Matt Wolford. I'm president and an architect with Bray Architects. Steve Kunis is here as well this evening. Steve is another partner with Bray. As an organization, we have been planning, designing, helping communities evaluate needs in the K-12 marketplace for 50-plus years. I can fortunately say I haven't been doing it 50-plus years. I have been with the organization going on 20. So myself and Steve for almost 25 years have been mainly supporting K-12 schools in the general Wisconsin area in doing exactly what the district is undertaking, understanding needs and then eventually identifying solutions and possibly implementing. So this evening we're going to focus on a discussion related to needs and what did we find when we looked at the middle and high school level. If you wouldn't mind, how many of you either had students or yourselves graduated from the middle and or high school, so you've been through the facilities, just so I get a sense? Okay, maybe about half to 60% of the room. So as Dr. Gillespie did, I'll move a little bit quickly through some of the background information. I'll focus on the high school first. Middle school will go a little quicker because you'll see the format is generally the same for that. So the analysis you'll see this evening is based on January 9th of 2015 enrollment counts, which put the district at approximately 5,500, just under 5,500 students in total, with about 1,700 at the high school and just under 1,300 at the middle school level. The goal, again, as I said, is really a focus on needs. So we have not jumped to solutions. We have not studied them. Really, the goal was to remain concentrated on identifying what needs were present at the middle and high school level. Architects, we like pictures better than words, so we easily could have done this with a chart or just a description. Your high school building has really evolved over time. It began in the early 60s, 1962, as a junior high school, and has received a number of additions, 73, 93, with the latest being 2002. So 5 to 6 major additions and or renovations and countless other small renovation and or addition projects over time. I would say that's relatively common in a community similar to Hudson. You generally have invested when you had students present. You have expanded your facilities when the community was ready to support that expansion. But as you'll see as we get into this, some of the needs are really born out of a building that has evolved with multiple additions over many years. And some of the challenges are really just caused by that and really focus on the challenges that come with multiple additions and renovations over time. We looked at the site. As any of you know that have been to the high school and or used the high school or tried to come during the day, there is sometimes a site challenge. The district has done a great job, I think, trying to keep the site as safe as possible from the perspective of having crossing guards and making improvements in intersections to ensure that pedestrian and student traffic flow along with vehicles and buses, which are all blending together at the front of the site, is done in as safe a manner as possible. The district has, I believe, done a good job in partnership with the church across the street in providing additional parking for students and things whenever possible. But a building that has grown with student population as this one has, with a main feeder street and then on the south, and then an additional, I'll say more of an arterial feeder street on the north, the majority, if not the vast majority of traffic is focused on the south, as most of you know when you come. So that density of traffic, buses, cars, pedestrians, bikes, every means of transportation really does access this site generally on one side. So the building organization itself, we've evaluated the building, and one of the things we look at as a benchmark would be a square foot per student or square feet per student. So the building as a whole, square footage-wise, is approximately 290,000 square feet. That number divided by the just over 1,700 students would result in a 167 square feet per student average for this building here currently as it sits now. Obviously, student population impacts. That goes up, building doesn't grow, square feet per student goes down. We try to benchmark that. So there's a regional average. There's a source, School Planning and Management magazine does a regional analysis. They send out questionnaires to firms like ours that specialize in K-12 schools. They send out questionnaires to school districts that have done construction, and they find out how large is your school of different types by region. Why by region? As you can imagine, Florida, Arizona, they don't build as many hallways and corridors as we do here. They simply put a cover up and they walk outside to go between classes. So So we regionalize these averages to make sure that we're comparing as much as we can apples to apples. The regional average for the Midwest is 198 square feet per student per that source. So again, currently operating 167, regional average 198 square feet per student. This is again a summary basically of kind of general organization of the building. I think this is representative of some of the kind of junior high school building, a link that brings the buildings together, and then it eventually becoming just a high school to serve the 912 population. A bit atypical in that we have core academics on one end, core academics on the other end. Kitchens, cafeterias, auditorium where we sit now, what we'll call core spaces when we get a little further into this analysis in the middle. Again, very normal for a building that has evolved this way with multiple additions and renovations over a period of time. But it does tend to, I would say, spread the academic or the core academic areas more than we typically would see in a building. Classroom utilization is another area, and I can't read these notes. Let me grab mine here for a second. Another way to look at a building's utilization is how often are the classrooms utilized. And one of the main areas there is we look at it as a percentage. And the district operates currently at the high school level on an 8-period day. So 88% of the classrooms are used, let me get my math correct here, more than that, sorry. 94% of the classrooms in the building are used 88% of the day or more. So 88% of the time the classrooms are utilized. The standard or the recommended utilization based on the Council for Educational Facility Planners International is 80 to 85% utilization. So that again is an indication that the district and the staff and the building operations team are using almost every classroom more than a recommended average would be. Again, I think it's just a general indication that they're doing a good job, they're making best use of the building that they currently have, but we are operating, I think, at a little higher intensity of usage at the core classroom level than a recommendation or standard would be. Other areas, and I won't go into great detail on these, but these are other areas of need. Core classrooms we touched on, not only from a utilization, how often are they utilized perspective, but the type, size, and general location of them. Lab, career tech ed space would be, in our world, most of our worlds, it was shop class probably, or woods or metals. That curriculum has really changed and evolved to an integrated type of instruction, more focused on STEM is the acronym that many of us, science, technology, engineering, and math, have used. So those spaces have been adapted as best they can within the confines of what's here, but there's an additional area of need there. Academy support. The district and the high school have done a great job integrating academy-based and academy-style learning into the high school. They've taken on existing spaces, but there is some potential need to better support the academy structure, which is here at the high school. The district as a whole does a fantastic job with special education. Not only here, but you'll hear again at the middle school, this is an area of need. A lot of these are students that come into the district and come into the buildings, and again, the district makes do. They find space, they do a good job accommodating these students, they receive a wonderful level of service, but the building specifically was never designed or adapted as it could have been to better serve those needs. So again, special education, an area of need. Student support areas, this is in probably many of our worlds, again, this would be a guidance, psychologist, social work, career counseling, things like that are a need here. Performing and visual arts, rehearsal spaces, art studios, performance venues that not only serve drama and music classes during the day, community groups during the day and evenings, and then potentially large group instruction or student body gatherings in a space like this. Physical education, not only gymnasium space, but fitness center and or weight room space, more lifelong learning in the realm of physical education than our traditional Phy-Ed classes. The building has 2 gym spaces, basically. I would say generally, we'll touch on these in a little bit, they're undersized for the student population that we have here. And then building infrastructure, this is a key area. Plumbing, HVAC, electrical systems are antiquated here and would be in need of some attention moving forward. mentioned core spaces earlier. What is a core space? As an organization, we analyze classrooms being kind of the thing I think most people think about. So as we talked about earlier, many of the classrooms are being utilized at a much higher percentage rate than we would typically see. But we also look at the core being gyms, cafeterias, libraries, other spaces that have educational impact, are used for the delivery of curriculum, but aren't traditional classrooms. So as I just touched on from Phi-Ed, this building, the East Gym and the West Gym, they are doing their best to accommodate Phi-Ed in its current state. The quantity of spaces they're making do with the quantity. I would say the quality is another area that could be improved over time if the community makes a commitment here. But the one other thing is how does the gym space support co-curricular activities, extracurricular activities, and community uses? So that's another area from a core perspective is the gym to look at. A cafeteria is a key area, and I think it's a major area if you've ever been in this building during the school day with students in it, the core being cafeteria. At a high school level, we would recommend approximately 15 square feet per student that is seated in that space. You currently have 11 to 12 square feet per student of seating space within the cafeteria. That, in addition, is compounded by the limited number of serving lines that we have. So we're taking a little longer, potentially, than we need to get students into the space. And as we work around the state, one of the areas we're seeing an impact from cafeterias is that the more time we take to get food in students' hands, have them eat, the less time or the less potential, the less flexibility we have in our overall academic schedule to give those students access to more classes, to more intervention, to more specialists, to more teacher-student interaction. So that's another area to consider is a cafeteria that would give you more flexibility in schedule to get more student time with teachers and staff. Libraries and media centers, this equation is based on the Minnesota standard. The Minnesota standard for libraries is about 8% of your total student body, 8 to 10%, of your total student body times 40 square feet. It's in the report. Don't try to jot notes. That's kind of a complicated little formula. You currently here in this building have 4,700 square feet of library space. Based on the 1,700 students approximately at 8%, the recommendation would be 5,560. So that analysis would suggest a deficiency in square footage in the current library. Passing periods and circulation. Now, this is a unique challenge, I think, here at the high school. We provided some benchmarks here. So Hudson, this building currently has 16% of the total building area is circulation. We've had the good fortune of working in your neighboring community of Prescott on their new high school, which is under construction, and on a new high school down in Sun Prairie. Prescott has 19% of its total building area circulation, and Sun Prairie has 20% of its total building area in circulation. So there's a variety of factors that contribute to that, as you can imagine. Number of stories in a building, width of corridors, types of corridors. So as you'll kind of see here, we have a lot of what we call dead-end corridors in this building. We have a lot of corridors that head in a direction and stop, so every student is returning on that same path. So if we have 8 classrooms down a dead-end corridor, we eventually have to get all of those students in those classrooms back through a single location, which creates challenges in building circulation. That does not look atypical, again, for a building that has been added on to the number of times that it has been added on to over time. But what it is causing is it's causing challenges here at the high school with pinch points, with students having a difficult time getting from the two far ends of the core academic spaces in the building, adding to the required time they need for passing, but also using what has been kind of unfortunately dubbed the outdoor corridor, which is the sidewalk that runs between the two academic wings, regardless of time of year, warm weather, cold weather, rain. We have students passing using the outdoor corridor in lieu of the corridor right outside of the auditorium here because of pinch points, quantity of students in the space, and my assumption is just a general lack of comfort with them moving through that space. So circulation and passing time is another need here at the high school. And then finally, natural light was another consideration. There's a few quotes here, studies that suggest how students achieve and how they learn in spaces that have natural light. This current building has about 41% of its classrooms do not have natural light, so 41% without natural light. And using the two similar high schools or comparable high schools, Prescott again and Sun Prairie. Sun Prairie is 14% of their classrooms do not, which is 4 classrooms. And Prescott has 9 classrooms, or 11%, that do not have natural light. So that's the high school, and you'll see the similar format here in terms of analysis, so I'll probably just point out the highlights if that's okay, because the format and the general background is the same. So middle school, just under 200,000 square feet, serving a population of 1,271 students. One of the key areas here is we've got a lot of teachers that are not operating out of assigned classrooms. So we have 13 teachers as of last year that were operating on carts. They've been called cart teachers throughout this report, and that was just a name as the staff identified them. That's a cart teacher. I'm not a cart teacher, as we had discussions with them about this. So that's an area we're going to talk about a little bit more as we move through this. As we touched on in the high school, the evolution of a building, the middle school was built in 1994. I think what is most unique when we saw this is it is very atypical for a building built in 94 to already have received 3 additions to it. That suggests that you are a growing community and have adapted to support that population as best you can, but it's a very nice building. The district did a great job investing in a building that's got a lot of high-quality educational features in it. The only unique component here is just the number of times in its short life, by a school standards, that it's already been added to or had some minor remodeling occur. Site analysis, with Hudson Prairie Elementary and the middle school occurring and having, again, a very much a singular road access point. Anybody that has attempted to do drop-off or pickup with an elementary or middle school student or been in that general area, it does have significant traffic challenges that come with that. I think that's generally the nature of kind of today's transportation, today's involvement of parents bringing their students to school, maybe more than we walked or biked or rode buses. Again, the district has done a great job trying to make this as safe an environment as possible, but the density of students, the quantity of parents trying to drop off in very short blocks of time, short periods of time, and the singular roads serving this site are some complicating factors for traffic flow. Building square footage per student, currently 155 square feet per student, a regional average of 207 square feet per student. To note here, the building is relying on some square footage within Hudson Prairie Elementary School. It's shared square footage. That square footage is not included in this analysis of a square foot per student basis. There was no way to differentiate between middle school and elementary school use and how we would allocate that square footage. So that's a little footnote on that. Regional average 207 square feet per student, current 155 at the middle school. General organization is a house concept middle school, so we have 5 classrooms centered around a shared resource collaboration workspace, which we'll see in a minute. Very good plan. I think it was ahead of its time in '94 and has been really beneficial to the culture and the community at the middle school, and I think it's a strong component of that building design moving forward. Classroom utilization here is another critical thing. They have 9 periods of the day here. 8 of the 9 class periods, almost every classroom is utilized 8 out of 9 periods, and many are utilized every single class period of the day. That goes back to the CART teachers. So we have 13 teachers, again, who don't have a general home base. Students don't have the ability to access that teacher in a classroom where they're delivering their curriculum every day. So those 13 teachers are generally teaching in a classroom, but it's somebody else's classroom, and that's how we have driven such utilization here too. Almost every classroom, 8 out of 9 periods a day. The recommendation for a middle school would be 70 to 85% of a day a classroom would be utilized. So almost 100% of your classrooms used every period, recommended 70 to 85%. This will look really similar. Classroom quantity, no big surprise, what I just touched on. utilization of rooms, 13 teachers on carts. Middle school level exploratories and electives. I hit on STEM when I referred to the high school. You've got a nationally award-winning STEM curriculum. We were there a few times, and I think he walked in twice with another award that they won, and you had excited students. It's a fantastic curriculum that they're delivering. And again, they've done a good job to utilize the facilities and the space that's there, but exploratory spaces being art, music, STEM, tech ed spaces could use a bit of expansion. Flexible, small, and large group learning spaces. The house concept, as I referred to before, the non-structured classroom space, resource space, would be a good example of flexible learning space. Where do specialists go to work with students? They would often pull them out of a classroom to work on reading or speech or math intervention or whatever other component that they would need some additional support in. We don't have those small group instruction or flexible learning environments at the middle school. Generally not because they weren't designed, but because they're being utilized by core classroom teachers quite often for regular instruction. Special education, kind of repetitive from the high school, fantastic programs. You do a great job for students that have these needs. Spaces have been either utilized for other things or were not specifically designed for the intensity of instruction that is occurring within them. And then student support areas. Middle school, for any of you that remember, have a unique set of needs for students, developmentally, not just educationally, and so there's an additional level of intensity of need for the student support areas at a middle school, and we don't have those in, I think, the quantity or the quality that we need at the middle school currently. Looking at the core spaces again. So core is the house. We referred to it earlier. This is a photo you can see here. This is the space, shared collaboration space outside the classrooms. That has been not only reduced in size by additional lockers having to be added to it, so we have less square footage committed to that, but as I said earlier, it's also being used a lot more because of the quantity of specialists that need spaces like this. Gymnasium space, you have one complete gymnasium and then a carpeted multi-purpose space here. For the quantity of students, over 1,200 students in the middle school, we would consider that to be, kind of coin the term, under-gymmed. I don't think that's really a word, but we have fewer gyms than we would typically see in a building of this size. The cafeteria, we're looking here at, we have good seating space with some of the accommodations that have been made over time, a multi-purpose space adjacent to the current cafeteria. Really the challenge here is serving space, servery lines. We back up through the band and choir space and are having a difficult time getting students served in an efficient fashion to get them seated and moved back to the classroom. So then the final piece is, if anybody's curious in the report, how did we come up with those high school classroom daylight numbers before? There are exhibits at the back of the report to show how we did that math and how we calculated classrooms without natural light. So I will turn it back over to Judge for any questions.
Anybody have questions, Mr. Wolford? Microphone in either aisle. Why don't you come on up, use the microphone, please. If you don't hear what he's saying clearly, I'll have Mr. Wolford repeat the question.
Hi there, I'm Don Hale from the city of Hudson. It's just as a problem, we've had a problem looking for land. And I've been looking around for different school systems, and the one I've caught my eye is one in Washington State, where they basically built right on the same land, but they built a 3-story high school, and they could build it by the side and at the other time tear down the existing structures. And it just struck me that they were doing it on one on 40 acres, one on 26 acres, and they were handling the same amount of students we are. And it just seemed like a low-cost opportunity. It gets the education wing all together and gives you time to do something with the gym and all the support facilities. So I don't know if, I guess the question is a 3-story high school type of thing out of the question, or is that in this day and age?
I will again, to kind of refocus initially, we haven't studied solutions. So that has not been done yet. I will speak in general terms, though. I think your commentary on other districts doing either three-story buildings or building on and around existing buildings, that is common practice in communities. Every community is unique in how they approach that, but I would say three-story high schools are not atypical. Middleton is a three-story, Sun Prairie is a three-story. We're currently doing a three-story high school for the Port Washington School District on the east side of the state. I believe Monona Grove, Steve, if memory serves me correctly, is a three-story. So I would say the 2 versus 3-story or 1 versus 3-story discussion is not part of this analysis because we focused on needs. But I think your general comments about considering a 3-story, I think would be something we would be exploring in the next phase as part of the solution study.
Okay, another question. Thank you.
My name is Katie. I have a daughter who's a sophomore. And as you talk about common spaces and those transitional points, in the age of paperless, tablets, and other things, as you plan for these other schools in our area, was there discussion about smaller lockers, larger lockers, those common spaces in storage? I can't imagine my daughter not carrying a heavy backpack to school, but that's all evolving. What's the trend, or just thinking of common spaces and taking out some of those structures out of their day?
Yeah, I would say we have not seen a district commit to go lockerless quite yet, although almost to a district they say they don't really use them. So it's a combination of some districts having one-to-one devices where the majority of the student learning is done with the device in the classroom. Some, to be honest, don't allow backpacks, so students are carrying books, through the building more regularly, and for some reason, it doesn't seem like any student wears a coat anymore. So they're not using lockers like they used to, but no district has gone to the point of going completely away from lockers because they do feel that a student does and have a need for some personal space to put belongings and lock things for those that do use it. Good question, though.
I have a grandson in the middle school and a grandson in the high school. Up until this point, I'd thought of the high school more as just being too small and a little maybe unpleasantly old, but too small. But I get the impression more of like the school built by a camel, where you can add on so many times that it distorts the function. Am I reading you right?
Yeah, I would say that's fair, and I think the other part of it too is I think the additions over time have been done economically. So I think the district has attempted to be a good steward as much as possible and put the addition where it was most cost effective to put it. So again, I don't want to leap to solutions, but a solution as we get into that phase may be a more extensive, exhaustive addition and renovation project here that would deal or remedy some of those challenges of kind of the building built in a series of stages and not walk away from this investment completely. Again, I'm leaping to a solution. That wasn't the goal for tonight, but I think your commentary is accurate. Some of the challenges are created just by the nature of how the building has evolved over time, starting all the way back in the early 60s.
Thank you.
I thought for sure there'd be more questions for the demographer than the architect. I'm a little surprised.
Any other question, Mr. Wolford? And I'll just go a little bit out. Any questions for the demographer, Dr. Gillespie, in case someone thought of something like that? I'll make sure everybody gets their time for all their questions. For Mr. Wolford or Dr. Gillespie?
Perhaps for Dr. Gillespie or for the district. Wasn't last year's senior class the largest graduating senior class?
I believe so. I'd have to check.
Okay. And do you know the number, Dave? Sorry. Okay. I get the impression in the next 5 years, that will be the largest graduating classes that Hudson has seen. Is that?
Yeah, we'll have the big bubble coming through.
Okay, so there's a bubble and then potentially,
So Mr. Gamble's response was that he's not sure that last year's was the largest. He will verify that, but that there is a bubble currently flowing through the middle and then into the high school. Is that fair, Dave? Okay. And then I will just quickly touch, I breezed past the site component a little too quickly on the high school. The other thing the district is challenged with at times here is the lack of availability of outdoor recreation space for both co-curricular, phy-ed, and athletics. So the only real on-site athletic component here is tennis, if memory serves me correctly. So that is another area potentially of need, is allowing and offering students more access to those outdoor recreation and athletic venues here on site. Apologize for that oversight.
Should I use it? Okay, there we go. You asked about class sizes, and having had two of our younger two graduate since 2010, I think, yes, we had 2011 and then 2012 was bigger. This last year down a little bit, but then we have, I think it's the sophomore, this upcoming junior class is going to have like 470. There was an earlier question, I think Dr. Gillespie addressed it generally, but I did want him to talk about trends. You had some slides up there before, I don't know if we can get them back up, but the question Mr. Hoggett had was how that compared to capacity. And Mr. Gillespie, Dr. Gillespie, you haven't talked about capacity. Matt did when he talked about the report and the assessment from the architecture. But basically on those trends, was it true, at least for the senior high anyway, that you see a peak, it continuing to grow through 2025, and then a valley, and then back to that level, getting back to about that level in 2040?
2040 is likely to be above the level that it is today by a sizable margin. The projections I have are suggesting 2025 would be sort of the peak year. There would be some wave effect, but there would be wave effects generally above always above the level that the enrollment is currently. And I'm sorry, I don't have information on capacity.
And just for the capacity, which was determined to be, I think, 1680 a few years back, so that we're currently above that capacity, and basically you're saying that we're not, generally for most of those years, going to stay above that capacity figure for the next 25.
Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Gillespie. I just want to make sure that the public knows that you are considering our two private schools as well in those projection numbers, correct?
I'm sorry?
When you're calculating your projections for enrollments, you're calculating the two private schools that we have in Hudson.
Yes.
And those students funneling into the system.
The enrollment, the short-run enrollment projections are specifically for the public school, for Hudson Public School District, but the private schools and other educational alternatives show up in those grade transition rate, those grade progression rates. So there's generally a big change from 5th to 6th grade, and then also from 8th to 9th grade, where students leave the private schools and go to the public, and some students even high school age go to schools in other districts through open enrollment, or go to private schools. That information is all in that, it's in all those numbers, but the projection is specifically for the short run projection is specifically for Hudson School District. The longer run projection is for a population projection, which includes Hudson School District students as well as other people of the young people of that age group that are seeking other education alternatives.
Any other questions from anybody?
It's for Dr. Gillespie regarding the bridge impact. Unless I misunderstood you, I thought you made a comment that you didn't think the bridge would be a big impact for a certain period of time. Then I thought you had said it was going to ramp up after that. And if so, what would be driving the change after a period of time that more people would want to move? I assume that's what you were saying later on as opposed to when it first opens up.
Thank you. We looked at 3 alternative models of that migration impact, that response. One of those, the lower one, would have it that it would take 5 years or so before there would be a bridge impact, even after the bridge is completed. That would be the slow response. The highest would be that there would be an immediate response, that basically finish the bridge and people start moving in the next day. Which one of those is not altogether clear as to what is going to happen in the short run. There are many variables that affect that. In the longer run, even the higher rates of migration are still lower than the highest historic migration rates that the county saw in the late 90s and the early aughts. And that reflects this lower rate of growth in general, lower rate of migration into outlying areas of outlying counties of metropolitan areas. That collapse of the growth rates is still reflected, even though this would assume that there would be some increase in that migration rate. That's so basically we have a range of possibilities. Even the lowest possibility has it that St. Croix County, the Hudson County area, the bridge impact area would continue to grow. It would not grow at the very high rates of growth, the very unusual rates of growth that were experienced particularly in the 90s, but that there would continue to be growth in the area over the long run. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Who do you want to address it to?
Well, let's just start with you, but I guess, I may be a little slow. It takes me a little bit to put all these things together in my head, so I'm trying to process what you both have been speaking about, and I'm hearing you saying we are at capacity, beyond capacity in our facilities, and have been, and I'm hearing us talking about sort of this bubble that we're in, and maybe we'll, level off a bit in our projection, our forecast of number of students. And I'm hearing that to say, even with that, I guess that's the question, is even with us maybe leveling off, that we've got maybe a bubble we're in, we are beyond capacity now, and what do our facilities mean if we do level off? I'm hearing we still have a need, but I guess I'm not hearing that particular question answered of, we kind of know and are hearing where we're at now.
Yes, and I think that's probably more your question. I can't really speak to capacity, so.
Yeah, and I think the simple answer is yes. Even with a stable population, the report does suggest that you have a a space need and a core need at both buildings, which could be addressed moving forward. So the question is, how do we address it? That's the next phase of this process, and the hope is with Dr. Gillespie's analysis, we have a bit more of a projection to use as we start to evaluate future population. So right now, I would say all things continuing with current student population, there definitely is a need, and that is the basic summary of the report is there is capacity need at both buildings.
That was just kind of my question, is I'm hearing what you're saying about forecasting, I'm hearing where you're saying where we are, and that was my question. What are we saying about that? Are we saying, well, you know, we get beyond this bubble, or we still have a need? So thank you.
Dr. Gillespie, if you could just address that, I guess to follow up Cindy's question, on that issue of growth. You had talked about prior growth where we were experiencing 4% annually. I thought I saw your graph say that you're more expecting it to be along the lines of 1%, which is still growth. Yes. So what's your basic conclusion? If you heard Matt's basic conclusion, what's your basic conclusion?
Yeah. St. Croix County, the Hudson area, the western portion of St. Croix County are continuing to grow. And they will. It will continue to grow. It's just, it appears at this time, and like I say, forecasting is a very humble business, but it appears at this time, and there's growing, mounting evidence that this is going to continue for a long period of time, that the growth will be substantially lower, maybe a quarter of the kind of growth that you were experiencing. But 4% growth per year is an enormous rate of growth for a population. That is a really unusual rate of growth. Even 1% per year requires continuous updating of roads and schools and water treatment and things such as that. So even 1% can be in some areas a challenge to deal with. But 4% was an enormous rate of growth that it appears at this time that is not likely to occur in the future for a wide variety of reasons. And when we talk about population growth, we're talking about across the entire age spectrum. Much of the growth in the county, just like much of the growth in the nation, is going to be among people over 60 years of age. That's where the biggest level of, the largest level of growth is going to occur. We are an aging society, and that will also occur here as well. But we will see some growth in school age population as well.
Any other questions from anybody here tonight? I'll say a few words. You have anything you want to say about the process for this, Mr. Johnson? First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. Like I said, all this information is online. And Mr. Johnson will give a final
I just want to thank again everyone for coming and remind you to please, if you haven't done so already, please go online, hudson.k12.wi.us, and give us your ideas and your thoughts on how we can address our future needs for both the middle and the high school level. Thanks again for coming.